The first indication something was catastrophically wrong came at 3:47 hours, when the radio crackled to life in the pre-dawn darkness of forward operating base Viper. The voice on the other end was barely a whisper, punctuated by the distant thunder of artillery and the unmistakable whine of incoming mortars. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Bravo Company. We are pinned down in grid 524-378, taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support." The operations center erupted into controlled chaos as officers scrambled to assess the situation. On the tactical display, red markers blinked ominously in the Kandahar Valley, where an entire platoon of Marines had vanished into what intelligence reports had deemed a routine reconnaissance mission. Captain Victoria Heiress Blackwood sat in the corner of the briefing room, her fingers drumming against her flight helmet while senior officers debated response options. At 28, she possessed the kind of understated elegance that made people assume she'd bought her way into the cockpit rather than earned it through blood and sweat. Her father's telecommunications empire had made headlines for decades, but Victoria had deliberately chosen the grittiest, most unforgiving aircraft in the military arsenal, the A-10 Thunderbolt II, a plane so ugly and brutal that pilots called it the Warthog with genuine affection. "What about sending in the Apache?" Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the tension. "We need precision strikes, not some trust fund pilot playing war games." The comment wasn't directed at Victoria, but everyone in the room knew exactly who he meant. She'd heard variations of this dismissal for 3 years, ever since she'd graduated flight school with honors and requested assignment to the most dangerous theater of operations. Her squadron mates called her Heiress, with barely concealed contempt, assuming Daddy's money had paved her path to the cockpit of a $30 million ground attack aircraft. But what none of them knew, what Victoria had never spoken about during those long nights in the officers' club when the whiskey flowed and war stories emerged, was why she'd abandoned Manhattan penthouse parties for Afghan mortar attacks. The answer lay buried in a classified folder marked Operation Desert Mirage, a mission that had gone sideways 2 years earlier in Syria, where her younger brother Marcus had died screaming into a radio for air support that never came. The same kind of support that Bravo Company desperately needed right now, while precious minutes ticked away and American soldiers bled into foreign soil under an unforgiving sky that promised nothing but violence. The radio crackled again. Any station, this is Bravo 6. We are being overrun. Where is our air support?" Victoria's hand moved instinctively toward her flight suit zipper. In the corner of the briefing room, her A-10 crew chief caught her eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. They both knew what was coming. The real question was whether anyone else in this room possessed the courage to let her prove what she could do when American lives hung in the balance. And the desert wind carried the sound of dying men calling for salvation from above. The morning sun hadn't yet painted the Hindu Kush Mountains when Victoria stepped onto the tarmac, her boots echoing against concrete that still radiated heat from the previous day's relentless temperature. The A-10 Thunderbolt II squatted on the flight line like a mechanical predator, its twin engines positioned high above the fuselage, the massive GAU-8 cannon protruding from its nose like the stinger of some metallic wasp. This particular aircraft, tail number 810964, had been her mount for 18 months, and she knew every rivet, every scratch, every quirk of its hydraulic systems. Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez emerged from beneath the aircraft, her hands black with hydraulic fluid and her face creased with the kind of worry that only experienced crew chiefs understood. "She's ready, ma'am," Rodriguez said, but her voice carried undertones of concern that had nothing to do with mechanical readiness. "Fuel topped off, full load of 30mm, and we've hung 4 AGM-65 Mavericks plus the gun pods you requested." The older woman had served 3 tours in Iraq and possessed an intuitive understanding of combat that transcended rank structure. She'd seen enough young pilots disappear into hostile skis to recognize the particular weight Victoria carried in her shoulders this morning. "Weather?" Victoria asked, pulling on her flight gloves with practiced efficiency. The ritual of pre-flight preparation had always calmed her nerves, each step a familiar dance that transformed civilian anxieties into military focus. Rodriguez consulted her tablet, squinting against the brightening horizon. Ceiling unlimited, winds from the southwest at 15 knots, gusting to 22. Perfect flying weather if you don't count the people shooting at you. The comment would have been insubordinate from anyone else, but Rodriguez had earned the right to speak plainly through 2 decades of keeping pilots alive. In the distance, the radio tower broadcasted the morning's operational updates, but Victoria's attention focused on the weight of her sidearm and the emergency locator beacon clipped to her survival vest. Every piece of equipment told a story: the beacon that would guide rescue teams to her location if she went down, the survival kit that contained enough supplies for 3 days in hostile territory, the encrypted radio that would be her lifeline to friendly forces. She'd memorized the emergency frequencies and extraction procedures, but those contingencies felt abstract compared to the immediate reality of 30 Marines dying in a valley less than 40 minutes away. The squadron commander's voice echoed across the tarmac through the base's public address system. "Attention all personnel. We have American forces in contact requesting immediate close air support." The words transformed the morning routine into something urgent and deadly serious. Victoria felt her heartbeat synchronize with the rhythm of her breathing exercises, the same technique she'd learned during her first nervous solo flight 4 years earlier. But this wasn't training, and the men calling for help wouldn't get second chances if she made mistakes or hesitated when split-second decisions determined who lived and who died under the unforgiving Afghan sun. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through her headset before she'd even climbed into the cockpit. "Heiress, you're cleared for immediate departure, but understand this: you're going into a hot zone with unknown anti-aircraft threats and friendlies in danger close proximity to enemy positions." His tone carried professional concern mixed with barely concealed doubt about her capabilities. "This isn't some trust fund adventure, Captain. Real Marines are dying while we talk." Victoria bit back her first response, focusing instead on the technical demands of the mission ahead. The A-10's cockpit wrapped around her like a familiar embrace as she settled into the ejection seat and began the startup checklist. Each switch and gauge held specific meaning, from the engine temperature indicators to the weapons system, displays that would soon coordinate devastating firepower with surgical precision. The aircraft's twin General Electric TF-34 engines wound up with their distinctive whine, a sound that had become synonymous with salvation for ground troops throughout the Middle East. She adjusted her helmet's heads-up display and tested the targeting systems, watching digital crosshairs dance across the canopy as she tracked imaginary targets on the taxiway. Master Sergeant Rodriguez appeared beside the cockpit, her face serious but confident. "Ma'am, that radio call from Bravo Company came in again 3 minutes ago. They're taking casualties and running low on ammunition. Time to do what you do best." The crew chief's faith meant more than any official commendation, because Rodriguez had serviced aircraft for pilots who never came home, had seen the difference between competent aviators and truly exceptional ones, who possessed that indefinable quality that transformed mechanical skill into something approaching artistry. Victoria nodded and keyed her radio. "Tower, Heiress requesting immediate departure for close air support mission. Grid 524-378, troops in contact, requesting expedited handling." The tower's response came immediately. "Heiress cleared for takeoff, runway 03, winds 040 at 17 knots. Contact departure control on 254.7. Good hunting." The casual professionalism of air traffic control couldn't mask the urgency everyone felt as another American unit fought for survival in hostile territory. The A-10 rolled forward with mechanical determination, its landing gear absorbing the rough concrete as Victoria aligned with the runway centerline. She pushed the throttles forward and felt 16,000 pounds of thrust accelerate the aircraft through rotation speed, lifting her toward a sky that promised violence and demanded precision. Below, the base disappeared into the brown vastness of Afghanistan, while ahead lay a valley where courage would be measured in milliseconds, and survival depended entirely on her ability to deliver death with surgical accuracy. The landscape below transformed from barren desert to rocky highlands as Victoria guided her A-10 through the mountain passes that led to Grid 524-378. Her navigation display showed the target area as a pulsing red diamond, but the sterile digital representation couldn't convey the human drama unfolding 30,000 feet below. The radio chatter had intensified during her 20-minute flight, with multiple calls for medical evacuation and urgent requests for ammunition resupply, painting a picture of desperate men holding impossible positions against overwhelming odds. "Heiress, this is Overlord," came the voice of the airborne controller circling high above the battlefield in a modified C-130. "We have eyes on your target area. Bravo Company is pinned down in a natural depression approximately 2 clicks north of the village. Enemy positions are dug in along the ridgeline to the east, with at least 2 heavy machine gun emplacements and probable mortar positions." The clinical description masked tactical complexity that would challenge even experienced pilots. Friendly forces scattered across broken terrain, enemy positions that required precise identification, and civilians who might be caught between competing forces. Victoria studied her targeting display as the valley came into view, a brown scar cut between limestone ridges that rose like broken teeth against the morning sky. Smoke columns marked impact points where mortars had found their range, and she could see the desperate geometry of the firefight. Marines clustered behind insufficient cover, while muzzle flashes sparked from hidden positions along the eastern ridge. Her infrared sensor revealed heat signatures that told the story of men pressed against rocks, trying to become one with stone that offered little protection from high-velocity projectiles. "Overlord Heiress has visual on the target area," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I count approximately 15 heat signatures in the depression, friendly forces. Ridge line shows multiple firing positions, approximately 40 to 50 enemy personnel." The numbers represented tactical reality, outnumbered Marines facing disciplined fighters who held the high ground and possessed intimate knowledge of local terrain. Without air support, the mathematics of small unit combat favored the defenders. The A-10's cannon gave her unparalleled firepower for close air support missions, but effectiveness depended entirely on target identification and precise delivery. The GAU-8 Avenger could fire 70 rounds per second, each projectile weighing nearly a pound and capable of penetrating armored vehicles, but friendly fire incidents haunted every close air support pilot's nightmares. She needed to see the battlefield clearly, understand the tactical situation completely, and deliver firepower with surgical precision that left no margin for error or hesitation. "Bravo 6, this is Heiress inbound your position for close air support," Victoria transmitted on the ground frequency. "Mark your position with colored smoke and identify enemy targets." The response came immediately, tinged with desperate relief. "Heiress, Bravo 6, popping red smoke now. Enemy positions are dug in along the entire ridgeline to our east, approximately 300 meters. We have wounded who need immediate evacuation, but we cannot move under this fire." The red smoke billowed up from the depression like a bloody flag, marking American positions with unmistakable clarity. Victoria rolled her aircraft into a shallow left turn, positioning herself to attack the ridge line from the south while maintaining visual contact with friendly forces. The targeting computer calculated wind drift and ballistic trajectories, but final target selection, depended entirely on her ability to distinguish between combatants and civilians, between legitimate military targets and protected structures that might house non-combatants seeking shelter from violence they never chose. Through her magnified targeting display, she could see individual figures moving between rock formations, the distinctive silhouettes of men carrying weapons with practiced familiarity. Muzzle flashes provided definitive confirmation of hostile intent, and she began selecting targets with the methodical precision her training had hammered into instinct. The first pass would determine whether she possessed the skill to extract Marines from an impossible situation, or whether her father's money had purchased nothing more than an expensive coffin with wings, and the capability to spread destruction indiscriminately across terrain that held both enemies and innocents in fatal proximity. Victoria's first gun run began with a steep diving approach that brought her, screaming down toward the ridgeline at 300 knots, the aircraft's ungainly appearance belying its deadly precision. The GAU-8 cannon erupted in a sustained burst that lasted 3 seconds, but delivered 200 rounds of depleted uranium projectiles into carefully selected impact points. The sound reached the Marines in the valley as a distinctive BRRRT that had earned the legendary status among ground troops who understood that noise meant salvation was incoming at 2,400 feet per second. Limestone dust and smoke obscured the ridge as Victoria pulled up and banked left for her second approach, but the immediate effect was obvious. Hostile fire from the eastern positions had ceased entirely. "Bravo 6, Heiress. How copy my last run?" she transmitted while configuring for another attack. The response came with barely contained excitement. "Heiress, beautiful work. You silenced the main machine gun position. We're seeing enemy personnel withdrawing from the eastern slope, but we've still got mortars firing from the north ridge." The tactical situation had shifted dramatically in less than 30 seconds. Victoria's precision gunnery had eliminated the most immediate threat and given the Marines breathing space to reorganize their defense, but the battle was far from over. Enemy mortar teams possessed the range and accuracy to continue inflicting casualties from positions that required different tactics to neutralize. She needed to locate indirect fire positions that revealed themselves only through brief muzzle flashes, then deliver precise strikes without endangering civilians who might be sheltering in nearby structures. Her infrared display showed heat signatures moving along the northern ridgeline, personnel who were attempting to reposition heavy weapons or establish new firing positions. Victoria selected one of her AGM-65 Maverick missiles and locked onto what appeared to be a mortar position, but hesitated as her targeting computer indicated possible structures nearby that could house non-combatants. The rules of engagement required positive identification of military targets and reasonable certainty that collateral damage would not affect protected persons or property. "Overlord Heiress, I have possible mortar positions on the North Ridge, but there are structures nearby that could be civilian shelters. Request guidance on engagement criteria." The airborne controller's response came quickly. "Heiress, cleared hot on all military targets. Intelligence indicates no civilian presence in that grid square, but exercise appropriate caution." The authorization gave her legal cover, but the moral responsibility remained entirely hers. Every trigger pull represented a decision that could save American lives or destroy innocent families. Victoria lined up for her missile attack, watching digital crosshairs converge on what appeared to be a camouflaged mortar pit. The Maverick's infrared seeker locked onto heat signatures that matched enemy personnel operating crew-served weapons, and she squeezed the trigger. The missile accelerated away from her aircraft with a bright plume of exhaust, tracking toward its target with electronic determination that eliminated human uncertainty from the final impact. Seconds later, an explosion erupted on the ridge as 500 pounds of high explosive eliminated another source of indirect fire that had been terrorizing Marines trapped in the valley below. The battlefield transformation was remarkable. What had been a desperate defensive action became a tactical victory. As enemy forces withdrew from positions they could no longer hold against airborne firepower. Victoria's radio crackled with reports of successful medical evacuation and ammunition resupply as helicopters moved into landing zones that had been impossible to reach under hostile fire. Her A-10 circled overhead like a mechanical guardian angel, its presence alone sufficient to deter enemy reinforcement or renewed attacks. The debriefing session at Forward Operating Base Viper began 2 hours after Victoria's A-10 touched down, but the atmosphere had changed completely from her morning departure. Colonel Harrison, who had questioned her competence just hours earlier, now studied after-action reports with expressions that bordered on amazement. 15 confirmed enemy casualties, 3 crew-served weapons destroyed, mortar positions eliminated, and 0 friendly fire incidents, he read aloud. Additionally, your precise engagement enabled medical evacuation of 4 wounded Marines and successful resupply of ammunition to besieged positions. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had already completed the aircraft's post-flight inspection, documenting ammunition expended and system performance with professional thoroughness. She brought her bird back without a scratch, Rodriguez reported to the assembled officers. Textbook gunnery, perfect target identification, and surgical precision under combat conditions. The crew chief's endorsement carried weight that transcended rank structure. Enlisted personnel who maintained combat aircraft possessed an intimate understanding of pilot capabilities that often proved more accurate than official evaluations. Victoria sat quietly during most of the briefing, her flight suit still damp with perspiration, and her hands steady despite the adrenaline that was slowly wearing off. The mission's success had vindicated her training and competence, but she took no satisfaction from enemy casualties or the destruction her weapons had caused. Each trigger pull had been necessary to save American lives, but killing remained a grave responsibility that demanded sober reflection rather than celebration or self-congratulation. Captain Blackwood, Colonel Harrison addressed her directly for the first time since her arrival at the base. Your performance today was exemplary. You demonstrated exactly the kind of precision and judgment we need for close air support missions in complex environments. The formal praise represented a dramatic shift from his earlier skepticism, but Victoria recognized that one successful mission wouldn't entirely overcome prejudices about her background and motivations for military service. The radio interrupted their discussion with another urgent call. Any station, this is Charlie Company requesting immediate close air support. We are taking heavy casualties from enemy positions in grid 630-4289. The familiar desperation in that transmission reminded everyone that today's success was just one battle in a war that continued despite tactical victories. Victoria looked at Colonel Harrison with questioning eyes, and his nod came without hesitation. Heiress, you're cleared for immediate departure. Think you can duplicate this morning's performance? Victoria's response was professional and confident. Sir, just point me toward the Marines who need help. As she walked back toward the flight line, Master Sergeant Rodriguez fell into step beside her. Ma'am, word's getting around about what you did this morning. Ground troops are asking specifically for Heiress when they need close air support. The comment carried implications that extended beyond tactical considerations. Reputation among combat veterans was earned through demonstrated competence under fire, not family connections or financial influence. The afternoon sun painted the Afghan landscape in shades of gold and brown as Victoria climbed back into her A-10's cockpit. But the beauty of the scenery couldn't mask the harsh realities of ongoing combat operations. Somewhere out there, Marines were fighting for their lives against an enemy that gave no quarter and expected none in return. Her weapons systems had been reloaded, and her fuel tanks topped off. transforming mechanical systems back into instruments of precision warfare that would soon deliver salvation to men who desperately needed to believe that someone was coming to help them survive another day in a war that seemed to have no clear ending in sight. The second mission of the day began with intelligence reports that painted a more complex picture than the morning's engagement. Charlie Company had stumbled into a carefully prepared ambush that suggested coordinated enemy planning rather than opportunistic harassment. "Heiress, this is Overlord," came the familiar voice of the airborne controller. "Target area shows significant enemy presence with possible anti-aircraft weapons. Recommend extreme caution during your approach." The warning carried implications that transformed routine close air support into something approaching a high-threat penetration mission. Victoria studied her tactical display as she approached Grid 630-4289, noting terrain features that offered both advantages and dangers for low-level attack runs. The area featured deep ravines that could conceal surface-to-air missiles, but also provided masking terrain that would limit enemy acquisition time. Her electronic warfare systems detected intermittent radar emissions that suggested mobile anti-aircraft units, but the signals were too brief and scattered to provide precise locations for preemptive strikes. "Charlie 6, this is Heiress inbound your position," she transmitted on the ground frequency. "Request detailed situation report and threat assessment." The response carried undertones of exhaustion and stress that indicated prolonged combat. "Heiress, Charlie 6, we've been in contact for 3 hours. Enemy has us pinned in a wadi approximately 2 clicks northeast of Checkpoint Bravo. They're using mortars and what sounds like a recoilless rifle. We've got multiple casualties who need immediate evacuation." The tactical situation demanded careful planning rather than immediate attack. Victoria established a high-altitude orbit while studying the battlefield through her targeting systems, looking for enemy positions that revealed themselves through muzzle flashes or heat signatures. The disciplined nature of hostile fire suggested experienced fighters who understood the importance of concealment and coordinated tactics. They had chosen their ambush site carefully, using terrain to channel American forces into killing zones while maintaining covered withdrawal routes. "Overlord, Heiress requesting current intelligence on enemy anti-aircraft threats in this grid square," Victoria transmitted while continuing her reconnaissance. The controller's response was not encouraging. "Heiress, we have unconfirmed reports of possible SA-14 or SA-16 man-portable systems. Additionally, there's been intermittent radar activity consistent with mobile AAA guns. Recommend maintaining altitude above 14,000 feet during target identification phase." Victoria understood the implications immediately. Shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles were deadly threats to low-flying aircraft, particularly during attack runs that required predictable flight paths for accurate gunnery. The A-10's design incorporated significant survivability features, including redundant flight controls and armored protection around vital systems, but no aircraft was invulnerable to modern anti-aircraft weapons employed by skilled operators. She needed tactics that balanced effectiveness against ground targets with protection from air defense systems. Her solution emerged from studying terrain features that offered natural masking during attack approaches. A series of ridgelines running north-south provided concealment for low-level attacks from unexpected directions, while deep valleys offered escape routes that would complicate enemy tracking solutions. Victoria began her first pass from the west, using terrain masking to remain undetected until the final moments before weapon release. The GAU-8 cannon erupted in a devastating burst that swept across suspected enemy positions, but she pulled off target immediately and dove toward the valley floor to break any tracking solutions. The immediate response confirmed her suspicions about air defense threats. A surface-to-air missile streaked past her aircraft's left wing, missing by less than 50 meters. "Heiress taking SAM fire," she transmitted while executing violent evasive maneuvers that tested her aircraft's structural limits. The missile's proximity fuse activated harmlessly behind her, but the threat was now confirmed and deadly serious. Any future attack runs would face active opposition from weapons systems, specifically designed to destroy aircraft like hers. Despite the surface-to-air threat, Victoria's cannon attack had achieved significant tactical results. Radio chatter from Charlie Company indicated that enemy mortar fire had ceased, and American forces were attempting to establish a landing zone for medical evacuation. Her precision gunnery under extremely dangerous conditions had created exactly the kind of tactical opportunity that could transform a desperate defense into successful withdrawal. But the price of that success was escalating risk to her aircraft and mission. Victoria's tactical creativity emerged during her second attack run, which approached from the northeast using a deep ravine for concealment until the last possible moment. Instead of the conventional diving attack that air defense crews expected, she flew at extremely low altitude through terrain that masked her approach completely. The enemy positions appeared with startling suddenness as she crested the final ridge, and her cannon fire swept across targets that had no time to react or take defensive measures. Two more bursts eliminated suspected anti-aircraft positions before she disappeared back into the ravine system that provided protection from retaliatory fire. The radio erupted with excited transmissions from Charlie Company. "Heiress, outstanding work. Enemy fire has stopped completely, and we have helicopters inbound for casualty evacuation. You've saved a lot of lives today." Victoria acknowledged the praise with professional modesty while scanning her instruments for damage from the surface-to-air missile's near miss. All systems showed normal parameters, but she knew that modern warfare was unforgiving to pilots who became careless or overconfident during extended combat operations. Her fuel state indicated sufficient reserves for continued operations, but ammunition levels were approaching minimum combat loads. The morning mission had expended significant ordnance, and this afternoon's engagement had required precise gunnery that consumed ammunition at rates that limited future offensive capability. Victoria calculated that she had sufficient cannon rounds for one more substantial engagement, but any additional missions would require return to base for rearmament and refueling. "Overlord Heiress requesting permission to return to base for fuel and ammunition," she transmitted while establishing a northbound heading toward forward operating base Viper. "Mission complete. Charlie Company is secure and conducting medical evacuation." The controller's response carried obvious satisfaction. "Heiress, mission accomplished. Outstanding work today. Return to base and prepare for possible additional tasking this evening." The comment suggested that her demonstrated competence had transformed her from a questionable asset into a preferred resource for the most challenging close air support missions. As her A-10 crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains toward home, Victoria reflected on the day's events with mixed emotions. She had proven her competence beyond any reasonable doubt, saved American lives through precise application of firepower, and earned respect from veterans who valued results over pedigree. But success in combat carried moral weight that comfortable civilians could never understand. Every trigger pull had ended human lives, regardless of the tactical justification or strategic necessity. The responsibility was hers alone to carry. The setting sun painted the Afghan landscape in brilliant oranges and purples, as Victoria guided her battle-tested A-10 toward the familiar runway of forward operating base Viper. Below, the eternal mountains held secrets of countless conflicts stretching back through centuries of warfare. But her immediate concerns focused on fuel state, ammunition levels, and the mechanical reliability of systems that had performed flawlessly despite extreme combat stress. Master Sergeant Rodriguez would conduct another thorough inspection, documenting every detail that might affect future missions or pilot safety. The debrief for her second mission drew a larger audience than the morning session, including senior officers who had flown in from Bagram Airfield specifically to assess her performance. Colonel Martinez, a veteran A-10 pilot with 3 combat tours and a distinguished flying cross, studied gun camera footage with obvious professional interest. Captain Blackwood, this is textbook close air support execution under extremely hazardous conditions, he announced to the assembled group. Your target identification was precise, your gunnery was surgical, and your tactical decision-making demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment we need for complex urban environments. The footage revealed details that Victoria remembered only as brief impressions during the stress of combat: muzzle flashes winking out under her cannon fire, secondary explosions that indicated ammunition storage sites, the desperate movements of enemy personnel attempting to escape predetermined kill zones. Each frame represented split-second decisions that had determined who lived and who died in valleys where American and enemy forces engaged in the most intimate form of warfare imaginable. "Ma'am," interrupted Master Sergeant Rodriguez from the back of the briefing room, "there's something else you should know." The experienced crew chief's voice carried undertones of excitement mixed with professional pride. "Word has spread throughout the entire theater about your missions today. Ground units are specifically requesting Heiress for close air support. That doesn't happen often, but when it does, it means you've earned something money can't buy: the absolute trust of combat infantry who know their lives depend on your competence." Victoria felt the weight of that responsibility settle around her shoulders like a familiar but heavy cloak. Reputation among combat veterans represented the ultimate validation for military professionals, but it also created expectations that demanded consistent performance under conditions that offered no margin for error or hesitation. Every future mission would be measured against today's success, and the men calling for help would expect nothing less than surgical precision delivered with absolute reliability. Colonel Harrison, who had questioned her competence that morning, now approached with expressions that bordered on embarrassment mixed with professional respect. "Captain, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your background rather than your demonstrated competence. That was wrong, and it nearly prevented us from utilizing one of our most effective close air support assets." The admission represented more than personal growth. It acknowledged the dangerous tendency to judge military professionals by criteria that had nothing to do with combat effectiveness. The evening's intelligence briefing revealed disturbing trends that suggested escalating enemy activity throughout the region. "We're seeing increased coordination between previously independent groups," announced the intelligence officer, pointing to a tactical map covered with red symbols that indicated hostile activity. Today's engagements were more sophisticated than typical harassment operations. They're using combined arms tactics and modern weapon systems that suggest external support or training. The implications were clear. Future missions would face increasingly dangerous threats that demanded even higher levels of pilot skill and aircraft capability. Victoria studied the intelligence reports while planning mentally for tomorrow's probable missions. The enemy was learning from each engagement, adapting tactics that exploited perceived American vulnerabilities while attempting to negate advantages provided by superior firepower and technology. Success required constant evolution of tactics, techniques, and procedures that stayed ahead of adversary countermeasures. Complacency or predictability would inevitably lead to catastrophic failure under conditions that punished mistakes with death. "Captain Blackwood," Colonel Martinez addressed her directly, "based on today's performance, I'm recommending you for assignment to our Special Operations Support Unit. We need pilots who can deliver precision firepower in complex environments where civilian casualties or friendly fire incidents would have strategic implications." The offer represented recognition of exceptional competence, but also guaranteed assignment to the most dangerous and demanding missions in the theater. Victoria's response came without hesitation. "Sir, I'd be honored to serve wherever the mission requires, but I have one request. I want to keep Master Sergeant Rodriguez as my crew chief. Today's success was a team effort, and I trust her to keep my aircraft mission-ready under any conditions." The comment demonstrated understanding of the symbiotic relationship between pilots and maintenance personnel that determined mission success or failure. Aircraft were only as reliable as the technicians who serviced them, and Rodriguez had proven her competence beyond any reasonable doubt. As the briefing concluded and officers dispersed to evening meals and administrative duties, Victoria walked back toward her quarters with thoughts that focused on tomorrow's probable challenges rather than today's accomplishments. The Afghan night was surprisingly cold, and stars shone with crystalline clarity in air unpolluted by industrial development. Somewhere out there, Marines and soldiers stood guard at remote outposts, knowing that morning would likely bring renewed contact with an enemy that gave no quarter and respected no rules except victory and survival. 3 weeks later, Forward Operating Base Viper had transformed from a routine logistics hub into the epicenter of the most intensive close air support operations in the Afghan theater. Victoria's call sign, Heiress, had become legendary among ground forces throughout the region, who requested her specifically for missions that demanded surgical precision under impossible conditions. The irony wasn't lost on her. A nickname that began as mockery had evolved into a mark of respect that opened doors and commanded attention from the highest levels of military command. The missions had evolved in complexity and danger as enemy forces adapted to her tactics and capabilities. What began as straightforward close air support had escalated into deep interdiction strikes against high-value targets, combat search and rescue operations, and urban close air support missions, where friendly forces operated within meters of civilian structures. Each engagement demanded innovation and precision that pushed both pilot and aircraft to performance limits that existed only in theory, until combat conditions made them operational requirements. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had become more than a crew chief. She was Victoria's tactical partner, who understood the subtle relationship between aircraft performance and mission requirements. "Ma'am, we've logged 137 combat hours in the past 3 weeks, Rodriguez reported during the morning's pre-flight inspection. "That's more combat time than most pilots see in an entire deployment, and your bird is still performing at maximum capability. But I'm seeing stress indicators that suggest we need to schedule some maintenance time soon." Victoria nodded while studying the mission briefing for what intelligence described as their most challenging target to date. "Alina, what's your honest assessment? Can she handle one more high-threat mission before we stand down for maintenance?" The question represented the eternal balance between operational demands and aircraft limitations that defined military aviation. Pushing systems beyond design parameters inevitably led to catastrophic failures, but conservative maintenance schedules could mean disaster for ground forces who desperately needed air support. Rodriguez's response reflected decades of experience maintaining combat aircraft under conditions that demanded impossible compromises between safety and mission accomplishment. "Ma'am, she'll fly. But this is the last mission before we need at least 48 hours for complete systems inspection and component replacement. I won't sign off on anything beyond that without major maintenance." The crew chief's professional judgment represented the difference between calculated risks and reckless endangerment of both pilot and aircraft. The target briefing revealed why this mission demanded special attention from senior commanders throughout the theater. Intelligence had located a high-value meeting between Taliban commanders and foreign advisors in a compound that sat precisely between a school and a medical clinic in a densely populated urban area. "The window of opportunity is exactly 27 minutes, Colonel Martinez explained while pointing to satellite imagery that showed the target building in relation to protected structures. "Too early, and the targets won't be there. Too late, and school children will be arriving for morning classes." Victoria studied the imagery with professional intensity that bordered on obsession. The target compound featured thick walls that would require multiple Maverick missiles for reliable destruction, but collateral damage calculations showed unacceptable risks to nearby civilian structures. The solution required weapon delivery with precision measured in meters rather than tens of meters, accuracy that pushed guidance systems to their absolute limits, while demanding pilot skills that existed at the intersection of technical competence and intuitive artistry. "Ma'am," interrupted the intelligence officer, "there's one more complication. Recent reports indicate possible man-portable air defense systems in the target area. We're talking about modern shoulder-fired missiles with sophisticated seekers that can engage targets at altitudes up to 15,000 feet. The information transformed an already complex mission into something approaching a suicide run for conventional aircraft and tactics." Victoria's tactical mind began processing solutions that balanced mission requirements against survival probabilities while considering collateral damage restrictions that eliminated most conventional approaches. The A-10's durability offered advantages that no other aircraft could match, but invulnerability was an illusion that had killed overconfident pilots throughout military history. She needed tactics that acknowledged threats while exploiting enemy weaknesses and environmental factors that might provide tactical advantages. Her solution emerged from studying terrain features that offered natural concealment during the approach phase, combined with attack profiles that minimized exposure time while maximizing weapon accuracy. "I'll approach from the southeast using the river valley for concealment, then pull up for a single missile shot at maximum standoff range. The key is getting target lock before they detect my aircraft and can react with surface-to-air missiles." The plan was elegant in its simplicity, but execution would demand split-second timing and precision that left no margin for error or mechanical failure. Colonel Martinez studied her proposed flight path with obvious concern. "Captain, that approach takes you directly over 3 separate choke points where enemy forces could position air defense systems. Are you certain this is the